Thank you, everyone, for coming out. My name is Sean Smith, and as I mentioned, I'm with the Association for National Park Rangers. They're a nonprofit that's dedicated to preserving and protecting the national park system, but also promoting the profession of park rangers as well. So I'm representing them, and there's a little bit of information on that handout about the organization as well. I also want to thank you for coming out and attending my presentation. I know there's a lot of things to do on this ship, and your spending a little bit of time with me means a lot because I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing, so I really do appreciate that. And as I said when people were first coming in, if you've attended my other talks, I did usually wait till the end for questions, but if you have questions throughout this one, something you want me to clarify or you want to ask about something in particular, feel free to raise your hand and I'll be happy to call on you during this. So I'll just start by saying, who's having a great time on this trip? Anyone? Yeah, that's great. It's been really, really fun. This is the second cruise I've done to Alaska, and I've really enjoyed this one for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is I get to be up here and talk with people about one of my favorite things, which are national parks. So just throw it out there. Who's done something amazing? Went on a wildlife trek or went on saw the glaciers? Yeah? What animals did you see? Seals? Yeah? And whales? Okay. Yeah? And eagles. What's that? Humpback whales. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. That's these types of experiences that you can have in Alaska. They're like one in a lifetime. And I don't know how many people attended the ventriloquist act last night, but these trips are opportunities to create memories and experiences. So again, I'm really grateful that you're here with me. So when I was in Juneau, I did the trip out to the Mendenhall Glacier. Did anyone go out to that? Yeah, pretty unbelievable, that river of ice going down into the ocean. Did anyone attend my first talk about the difference between the Park Service and the Forest Service? So which agency, if you noticed, is running Mendenhall Glacier? Did you take a look? What's that? It's the Forest Service, exactly. So the Forest Service runs the Mendenhall Glacier. Meanwhile, did anyone stop at Skagway, or the National Historic Site there, the Klondike? And then yesterday in Sitka, you go to the Sitka Historic Site. Do you know who was running those sites? Park Service, exactly. So, well, good. You guys are learning. I'm glad to see that that you'll be able to take something away from this. So when you go on a trip, is there anything, when you get back, you read about something and you go, oh, I wish I'd known that beforehand, or I wish I'd done something different, when I was on that trip. I won't ask you to shout those out, but I'm sure there are, a few things that you wish you'd known about or understood prior to stepping, say, off this ship, or when you go to a town, that would have improved your visit. So, but not to worry. I've got a few things. I'm going to provide my top 5 tips for visiting national parks that will help improve your visits going forward. So, any questions before we start? Okay, well, let's get going. So for some of you, this is going to be a review. But for those that don't know me, I've worked in some of America's most spectacular parks and monuments, including Glacier National Park in Montana, the North Cascades in Washington. I was also in Yellowstone in Wyoming, and I worked for the Forest Service at Mount St. Helens. But I also spent some time in there working for an outdoor adventure company, and I spent the entire summer season, almost 9 months, driving around the United States with passengers from all over the country, and we basically did up to 3-week-long camping trips. And so over that time, I got to see nearly half of all of our national parks, from Maine to California, from Washington to Florida. So I've had a lot of experience living, working, and playing in our national parks. In fact, Sitka, I'm still going to see some, but Sitka National Historic Site was one of my most recent parks. I had never been to that park, so I don't know how many of you collect stamps for the parks, but I got my stamp for my passport book at the Sitka National Historic Site. So it was a great day for me, too. So, like I said, over that time, I've learned a few things about visiting national parks and how a sightseer can improve their experience, and maybe even, in the end, leave those parks in better condition than when we found them. So I'm going to give you my top 5 tips for your best possible Park Service experience. So it probably doesn't come as a surprise, but my first tip is to do a little homework before you step out the door. The National Park Service's mission is to conserve unimpaired the natural and cultural resources and values of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. And as I said the other day, the Forest Service's mission is a little bit different in that they have a multiple use mandate, which means, in short, they are to provide for the greatest good, for the greatest number of people, for the greatest period of time. So the Forest Service allows a whole host of activities that you would not normally find in the national parks. So that's one thing that I think sometimes surprises people is when they get to a national park site, and maybe they visited a Forest Service site before, they have done things on a national forest that they're not allowed to do in a national park. So understanding the difference between the two agencies really helps set your expectations. Due to this mission, the places in the national park system are a select subset of public lands. And as we talked about the other day, I'll see if this laser, there are about 88 million acres of national park sites, but a lot of them are very small national battlefields or historic sites out in the East Coast. You have to come out west to finally really get the big national parks that you've probably seen on Discovery Channel, that sort of thing, like Death Valley, which is over 2 million acres, Yellowstone as well. But this map is not to scale, so I said it's about 88 million acres. Over half of all the Park Service's acreage is in Alaska alone. About 65% of the land in the national park system can be found in Alaska. And parks like Wrangell right here are massive, 13 million acres. Almost the size of the Tongass, which we just happened to be in the other day when we were in Juneau. If you went out to the Mendenhall Glacier, you would have been in the Tongass National Forest. That's about 17 million acres. So the point I'm trying to make here is that national parks, while some can be very large, are often actually quite small. And a good majority of them are historic sites, places that commemorate or protect sites that are of importance to our culture or history. So, as I said, the system's made up of about 423 individual units, and those units, as you probably can imagine, are incredibly diverse. The National Park Service preserves and protects places with 19 different designations. So that often surprises people as well. You will see the National Park Service logo at your parks. It's the arrowhead, has a bison on it. But it often may have a different name in the national park. It may have a name of National Historic Site, as I mentioned, National Battlefield, National Lakeshore, National Monument. All of these can be within the national park system. And even though they each have a basic level of protection that the Park Service is required to provide them, some of them do have a little different management and things that they will or will not allow. So we'll talk a little bit about that. There are 63 national parks in the national park system, so places that have the designation of national park. And then in comparison, there's like 11 national battlefields, 60 national historic parks, 85 national monuments. Places like the Grand Canyon actually started out as a national monument and later were elevated to be a national park. 19 national preserves, 18 national recreation areas. And as I said, while all parks have the basic level of protection, some designations allow for other types of use. So a national recreation area is probably, as you can probably guess from the name, or a national preserve will sometimes allow activities that you wouldn't find in a national park, like off-road vehicle use. And in the case of Big Cypress or just outside Denali, there are times when they allow hunting in those parks as well. But in the vast majority of parks like Yellowstone, or the Grand Canyon, activities like that have been prohibited. Every state in the Union has at least one national park. Delaware, anyone from Delaware? No? Has one national park unit. It's called the First State National Park. Anyone know which state has the most national park units? Alaska's a good guess. What's that? California's a good guess. Utah? Washington, yeah, you can see. I guess it's hard to see, but actually California, we had the guess up here, has 23 national park units in it, from big parks like Yosemite, Kings Canyon, Sequoia, to much smaller parks as well, and national historic sites. So those parks range in size, as we just talked about, from the immense Wrangell St. Elias in Alaska, which I pointed out here. It's about 13 million acres, to a small park that I haven't been to yet, 0.2 acres, called the Thaddeus Kuzakow National Memorial. And that, I didn't even know this existed, and I need to get there. But it's in Philadelphia and commemorates a Polish immigrant who was a freedom fighter during the War of Independence. So as you can see, the size of the places the Parks Service actually protects is from probably a site about the size of this room to a place that's as large as West Virginia. So they actually get, they have quite the diverse range of places they have to manage. Along with the size, the designation and the size, national parks also range in the resources they protect. So places like Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, Mount Rainier, those traditional national parks that you've probably heard about, were established to protect the incredible natural wonders, the scenery, the wildlife that you've probably come to expect and associate with your national parks. Sorry, excuse me. Meanwhile, other parks were established to protect our cultural and historic heritage, places like Gettysburg National Battlefield in Pennsylvania, and the Navajo National Monument down in Arizona and New Mexico. But along with historical and cultural resources, national parks protect some of America's most sacred ideas, hopes, and places as well, and values, excuse me. Independence National Historic Park interprets the nation's founding ideals, preserves the national and international symbols of freedom and our democracy. While parks like the Selma to Montgomery and the Trail of Tears National Historic Trails remind us that America's hallowed mission to create a more perfect union still has work to be done. A system this diverse has something for everyone, I would say. The outdoor enthusiast can find a whole plethora of places to stretch your legs. And the history buff can walk in the footsteps of some of America's greatest citizens, including Harriet Tubman, but also the first president, George Washington, as well as the inventors Orville and Wilbur Wright. Meanwhile, the artist and music lover can find a home in places like New Orleans Jazz National Historic Park down in New Orleans, as well as the Kolb Studio, historic studio at the Grand Canyon. So, as I said, and as you've seen, there's something for everyone in our national parks. And as I previously stated, the mission of the national park system is to leave the national parks unimpaired for present and future generations. This means that the National Park Service only permits a select number of uses, so that's a key point. So before you head out to your favorite park, it always makes sense to check in with the Park Service's website to see what activities are permitted and which are prohibited. Some parks, for example, allow bicycling, but only at certain times and on certain roads or trails, while other parks may allow dogs, but only on leash and in the front country, so in your campgrounds or near the visitor centers. The park website, which is nps.gov, and it might be a little tough to see, but it's down here at the bottom, is a great place to find the most up-to-date information on things like road closures, special events, times of guided hikes and campfire programs, and where one can find visitor services like gas, food, lodging, and other happenings and events that could possibly affect your visit. While there are plenty of great websites out there, about the parks, there may be some that don't have the most recent or up-to-date information, so I'd encourage everyone to check the MPS site. In fact, it reminds me of a experience I had when I was in Yellowstone. I was leading a hike out on the West Thumb Geyser Basin. It's one of the smaller geyser basins, and it's right on Lake Yellowstone. And this gentleman comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Ranger," and if you remember, that's how every question starts, with "Hey, Ranger. Where are the tunnels under Yellowstone?" And it took me a little bit by surprise. I was like, tunnels? Oh, I haven't heard about the tunnels under Yellowstone. So I'm not really sure. What do you mean tunnels under Yellowstone? And he had said, well, I've been reading online that there are tunnels under Yellowstone where foreign troops are being staged so that when the time comes, they can come out and possibly occupy places like Yellowstone and other parts of the West. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I hadn't heard about that, but, I'm a lowly GS5 Ranger. I'm just a seasonal, and they don't tell me everything, but I do know there are billions of gallons of boiling hot water under this park. I seriously doubt there are any tunnels under Yellowstone. And he turned to me and said, "Oh, I see you're one of them." So I don't know. I never found the tunnels in Yellowstone, and it's possible, but I would check with the NPS website to get the most up-to-date information on what is available. I never led any tours to the tunnels in Yellowstone. Okay, so you've done a little research. Next thing to do is make a plan. Will you be camping in the park? Will you be going on a long hike or a bike ride? Do you want to take a ranger program or a concession-led tour? What about meals? Where are you going to eat? Do you plan to cook your own meals? Is there a grocery store nearby? And if it is, what are its hours? Does the park allow fires when you're going to be there, or will you need a camp stove? These are just a few of the questions you're going to want to answer before you head out on your park experience. While in some instances I found it's fun to just head out and see where the adventure will lead you, in places like your national parks, it can lead to a very frustrating experience if you haven't done a little bit of planning before you head out the door. For example, I met people that arrived in Yellowstone or Glacier around 5 p.m., and they were very upset to learn that all the campsites had been already pre-booked for the entire time they were there. So the next several hours I would spend with them trying to figure out where they're going to be spending the night and what they would be doing. Others say that we're traveling to Stehekin or Mount St. Helens. We're disappointed to learn that some of the park roads that they'd hoped to travel on or campsites had been closed due to weather or fire or due to storm. So again, encourage you to do a little bit of that research, but then do the planning to figure out where you're going to go to make sure you can enjoy the things you want to see. On any given day, like I said, I spent a large part of my time at the visitor center helping visitors adjust their plans. So to make sure that they got the experience they wanted, but in light of the current situation. So when I was at Mount St. Helens, I worked down here at the Pine Creek Information Station, which is here. And this kind of greenish area here is the Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument. So over here, which is not on the map, is Interstate 5, and then down here is Portland, up here is Seattle. And Interstate 5, and to all these communities that are along here, they all put signs on the freeway that says, Mount St. Helens this way, Mount St. Helens this way, Mount St. Helens this way. Well, to the average person, where they want to end up is up here at the Coldwater Visitor Center, because that's the current visitor center that gets you the best view into the crater at Mount St. Helens. Well, as I said, if you're coming from Portland and you see a sign that says Mount St. Helens this way, people will be getting off the freeway here, and they'll be coming along here. They're driving and driving and driving, and they're like, where is this volcano that everyone's talking about? They eventually end up here at Pine Creek where I worked, and they were quite unhappy to find out that they were still at least 45 minutes to an hour away from Windy Ridge, which is where I worked just about every other day, which is the exact opposite side of where they wanted to be. In order to get there, they would have to go back to I-5, up another about 30 miles, and then in. So I could see how it would get real frustrating real quick. And so we would help them readjust their expectations and their plans and say you could drive up to Windy Ridge and get the view there, or go back and up in here. But we spent a lot of time working with people to readjust their plans. While having a plan and acting on that plan takes some effort, in the long run, it reduces stress and allows one to focus on the trip rather than scrambling to find a place to sleep. Now, that said, once you've made a plan, I always encourage visitors to pack their flexibility. National parks are dynamic places, and unplanned events that can impact your trip are always happening. So, how many heard of the recent floods in Yellowstone? Yeah. So this is the north entrance of the park, and they had just recently what they called a 1,000-year flood event, wiped out several of the roads to get in from the north side of the park. And the Park Service, although they've been able to reopen some of these areas, they're now looking at some of the roads probably being permanently retired. Some of these places are inaccessible now, and a number of visitors, wasn't their fault at all to get out on the road. The road has washed away. They're going to have to very quickly pivot in order to figure out how they're going to salvage their trip. So these threw a massive wrench in the plans of thousands of park visitors, and they had to quickly shift gears in order to save their trip. What about the rock slides in Skagway? Who had heard about those before they came on this trip? Yeah. So those rock slides, as you see here, this is where we just were a couple days ago, have come down and they've impacted the docks up at Skagway. And that's why this ship had to tie up offshore and tender us in, because normally they would tie up right next to the dock there and we would have walked into Skagway. These hillsides are becoming unstable, and I know the city of Skagway is now scrambling to figure out what they're going to do with this dock. Are they going to have to rebuild it, relocate it, or are they going to have to somehow shore up these hillsides in order to protect the public as they come in? But again, this is something that we all had to scramble with in order to figure out how we were going to get into Skagway. But other things can affect your trip as well, and you have to plan and pack your flexibility. So things like bison, simple bison crossing the road can impact your travel time across a park like Yellowstone. This is a picture I took about 10 years ago, and as you can see, the traffic is all the way around the corner, and it's all because there's 2 or 3 bison here that are all too happy to just stay in the middle of the road, and they weren't willing to move at all. And so this makes you realize that even though the map says that the drive time may only be 45 minutes to an hour, these types of events happen all the time and can add 30 to 40 minutes to your trip easily. In fact, these things happen so often that the rangers would be able to tell what type of animal there was just by the way the cars were on the road. So, for example, we'd be driving along and we'd see that there were cars just on, say, one side of the road parked. That's probably a deer or an elk or something like that. If there are cars parked on both sides of the road, similar to maybe what we see like this, you're looking more like bison or moose. Now, if cars are parked in the middle of the road and people are out of their cars running toward the wildlife, that's probably a grizzly bear or a bear of some kind. So we could tell pretty easily what type of animal we're going to be seeing just by how the cars were parked in the road. So this is an almost everyday experience. You have these bison or bear jams, so be prepared. Or you've got plans to be at dinner someplace and you're driving through through Grand Teton and you see this unbelievable sunset that you hadn't planned on. Take that opportunity. You can always go to dinner another time. Take the opportunity to take in the sunset and capitalize on these unexpected opportunities to have an experience. And as I said, another way to improve your park visit is to accurately set your expectations. So many park visitors try to see everything and rush their visits. So some of the national parks are massive, as I said earlier. And even if you had an entire lifetime, you would not be able to see everything in the park. So we'd already talked about it, but for example, Yellowstone is larger than the states of Rhode Island and Delaware combined. So how many of you're driving to Delaware, you get to the first entrance into the state, maybe there's a little visitor center there, you come in and say, I've got one day to see Delaware. I want to see everything. Tell me how to do that. Nobody would do that. No one would come in and say, I want to see everything in Delaware in one day. But we did get people coming into places like Yellowstone saying, I've got 4 hours. I want to see everything in 4 hours. Well, just the drive from Mammoth here down to this part of the park is about an hour and a half. Just the drive. That's if you don't stop and see anything. That doesn't include bison jams, getting anything to eat. So just that alone, that's 3 hours of your day alone, just going through the park. So set your expectations on what you can reasonably do in the amount of time that you have. One of the things I always encourage people, I worked down here at West Thumb, and there was a visitor or a campground here at Grant Village. And just by luck, I happened to get stationed there. But I think that's probably one of the best places to set up if you're going to Yellowstone. Why? Because it's halfway between the Yellowstone here and then the Grand Tetons, which is just down here. So you can make a day of your adventures. You go down to Grand Teton for the day and come back. Or you can go up to Old Faithful here and come back, or the northern part of the park. It significantly cuts down your travel times by staying in the middle of the park. I know some people would stay up at Mammoth. Then you're looking at that 3 hours here. So maybe another hour and a half to get to Grand Tetons, and you've got that entire drive home. It's tiring coming back late at night, and you're not sure what the animals are going to be on the road, that sort of thing. So again, a little pre-planning, thinking about where you're going to be and stay, definitely can help to improve your experience. So for those of you that are looking to avoid crowds and would like, a few more tips on that, how to maximize your trips, there's a few simple things you can do to improve your visit to the national parks even more. So I encourage people to visit those parks that have smaller crowds, that are less visited. There are a number of parks, might be hard to believe, but have significantly fewer crowds than, say, places like Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon. Places like the North Cascades, Isle Royal, Dry Tortuga, or Wrangell St. Elias that we were just nearby. They see a fraction of the park visitors that Yellowstone would see. Yellowstone on a good year will have 2.5 to 3 million visitors. The North Cascades, maybe 30,000 in a good year. You'll have a similar experience in those places, but you'll have much smaller crowds. Now, on the flip side of that, places like Yellowstone, because they're servicing far more people, will often have far more services that a park like the North Cascades would have. So that's going to take a little bit of planning to think ahead. Is there even a grocery store at this park? So do I have to bring all my food with me? Or will there be something there in the park for me to place to get food or to eat? So those are the types of things, the trade-offs you're going to find by visiting the smaller parks. Go during the shoulder seasons. For those that aren't familiar with that term, but I assume probably everyone in here is. Shoulder seasons mean the non-summer seasons. So those months like May September and October, you will start to see the crowds drop off significantly, even in the big parks like Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon. And that's primarily because some school's back in session in September and October, and school hasn't let out in early May. Crowds are going to be quite a bit lower during those times. The big peak seasons are obviously July, August, September, when you'll see massive crowds in these parks. Now, again, that said, those shoulder seasons, you might see fewer services. There may not be the ranger programs that you're used to. Some of the campgrounds may not be open, but often much of the park is still available, and you'll have a totally different experience than one you would be if you were sharing it with 2.5 million people. So that's a good advice as well. A thing that's happened due to COVID, we're seeing a lot more parks go to a reservation system. So places like Glacier Park now actually has a reservation system for actually going on the Going to the Sun Road. And you can get those reservations online at recreation.gov. But even with that, you are going to want to get to the parks early. So if you've ever been to a place like Disneyland or something like that, they have what's called the rope drop. And that's people that are getting there first thing in the morning in order to make sure that they can get into the park and access the things they want to see. Park Service has something similar to that. There are places where you want to be there first thing in the morning if you plan on hiking some of the most popular hiking spots. Up at Logan Pass, there's a campground up there over 6,000 feet, but that, campground, a parking lot for people to go and start hiking up in the high alpine area. But that parking lot can fill up by 8 o'clock in the morning. And after that, it's difficult to get a spot, and you may not be able to stop at Logan Pass. So I encourage people to get on the road early. Yes?
If you're a skier and you ski Big Sky or Grand Tetons or Jackson Hole, it's very easy to set up a snowmobile trip through Yellowstone, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, in the wintertime, so the recreation activities can change from summer to winter, and the crowds are going to be very different. Yeah, in Yellowstone, for example, they do allow for snow coaches and a limited number of snowmobiles. You have a very different experience. You're less likely to see grizzly bears, that sort of thing, because they're hibernating at that time. But the bison and elk and those animals are still in the park, and a number of people drops off significantly. I've been into Yellowstone in the wintertime, and it's a totally different experience, totally different park, very quiet. The crowds are much smaller, but the contrast between it can be really cold, 20 below, but then the geysers, which are over almost boiling, that contrast is incredible and definitely worth seeing. So again, if you think maybe how can I experience at a different time or season, that too can improve your experience in these parks. And then, the piece of advice I give as many people as much as I possibly can is to get away from your vehicle. If you can even get, a mile into the backcountry, you're going to lose the vast majority of people that come to the national parks. I remember places like Glacier, we would have a group or a name for the people that would get away from their cars. We'd call them basically like the 1% club. So 1% of the park visitors will get more than a mile away from their car. And places like Glacier and Yellowstone are, again, huge. Millions of acres in these parks. And if you can get even a short distance away from your car, you're going to lose the vast majority of the people that come to these parks. You're going to have a very different experience than, say, if you stay up in the front country. Not that there's anything wrong with those experiences, but if you're looking for maybe a little different experience, one that's more intimate and you have more likelihood of seeing wildlife, getting away from your car can definitely improve your experience. Going to move here a little bit. So another thing, so let's say, has this ever happened to you? So you visited a new city or state or even a country only to come home and find that you'd missed some really cool public festival or museum or concert or even a restaurant. Don't you wish that you had a friend or someone in that community or city that could recommend those don't miss opportunities, things to do and see? Well, in the national parks, you do. They're called park rangers. And it's their job to make sure that you have a good time in our national parks and they are there to make recommendations on what to see and do, and where to eat, places to stay, and where to see the wildlife. At Yellowstone, for example, we were often asked, where can we get into the hot pools? People were like, oh, I'd really like to take a swim in the hot pools. Well, as you can imagine, the Park Service doesn't allow for people to swim in the hot pools. The temperatures are near boiling in many of them, 212 degrees. And the resources around them, some of the thermal cones, that sort of thing, are very fragile and can be easily damaged. And the ground in many places is quite thin. So you may think that this ground is stable, but it easily can break and you can go through into possibly a hidden thermal feature. So Park Service frowns on and prohibits that. But unknown to most people, there are places where the thermal features will either run into a river or geysers shoot into the river and they heat up the water. So very similar. So park rangers know these types of places where you actually can take a dip in the river, which is almost as good as getting into the hot pools. But if people don't ask or talk to the rangers, they won't know about that. And for example, just between us, it's all along the Firehole River up on the northwest side of the park. So the next time you're in Yellowstone, ask where is it you can swim in the river that is being fed by some of the thermal features. That's their job. Stopping at a park visitor center is the first step toward any successful park trip. If you also have time, I encourage everyone to take a guided hike or attend an evening program or sit in on a campfire program. It's what's called the interpretation ranger's job to answer questions, but also to connect visitors to their parks and to show how, for example, melting glaciers up in Alaska or the spread of invasive species can impact you wherever you live. So how many of you went to the Klondike Gold Rush sites? Did anyone find out what the connection between your shopping at Nordstrom is to the gold rush of 1897? No? Okay, you're going to learn something next time you go shopping. So, in the late 1890s, gold was discovered up here in Alaska, and it set off this boom of people coming up to Alaska to strike it rich. So, places down in Seattle were actually promoting themselves as the place where you would get provisions to get started on your trek up to Alaska. Seattle before that was really kind of a very small backwater town. And the Chamber of Commerce took the opportunity to say, if you're going to Alaska, you want to come through Seattle to get your goods and services. They didn't have to. They could have picked any number of towns, but that's how Seattle got on the map. And in fact, there's a sister Klondike Gold Rush site in Seattle to the one up in Skagway. Anyway, so a vast number of people are heading up to Alaska to strike it rich. Unknown to them, though, most of the good sites had already been claimed. So the vast majority of people, the miners that came up to Alaska, never got any gold, never made any money on this. Either had to go home or find some other profession. Well, John Nordstrom's was one of those miners that had decided he was going to go up to Alaska and strike it rich, but quickly realized there were no claims to be had. He shifted gears very quickly and said, hey, there's a lot of miners up here that need shoes or clothes in order to make it possible for them to do their mining. And he founded the first store, Nordstrom's, in Seattle. And that's how he made his fortune. So park rangers' jobs are to basically show you those connections, that when you go shopping in Nordstrom's, you're actually benefiting from the legacy of the Klondike Gold Rush that happened over 100 years ago. And there's actually a national park site up in Alaska and Seattle that commemorates that. So national parks are gifts from our predecessors, which we hold in trust for our ancestors. It's our job to leave them in better shape than when we found them. But this can only happen if the public appreciates their parks, and that their experiences and that in my experience, that happens when the public feels connected to those parks. Park rangers can help you find those connections. So, on the other hand, please listen to their advice on how to safely visit and enjoy your parks. The fastest way to ruin your park experience is to have a visit with the law enforcement ranger or, God forbid, the paramedics. So we want to make sure we're doing what the rangers tell you to. So this reminds me of another story about bear management. I was leading a hike, and there's signs like this all over Yellowstone and other parks. And this gentleman came up to me. He's like, "Tell me more about bear management. What does that mean?" And so I said, well, primarily we start with things like we want to make sure people stay on the trails. They're making noise when they're out walking. They stay in groups. They're not hiking late at night because we don't want to surprise a bear. When you're in your campsite, we want to make sure that our food is secure, that we either have it in one of the bear-proof food containers or you have it in your car. And at that point, the gentleman stopped me. He's like, "This sounds less like bear management and more like people management." And I'm like, that's exactly what it is. We only, after we go through all of those steps, would we then take active actions to actually physically manage bears, ones that maybe have got into food, that sort of thing. Would the Park Service then come in, possibly harass that bear by using things like firecrackers to make sure they know that's not a place they want to be? Or if this is a bear that continually comes back, they will trap them and move them along. So, point being, you want to make sure you read these signs, follow the ranger's advice, because they're really there to help protect and make sure you have a good experience, but also make sure that we're protecting the resources and the park itself. Sorry, I'm just checking my time. So another piece of advice to having a good trip is to take kids with you. As some of you know, my parents saw it as their mission to take my brother and me to every national park from Florida to Alaska, from Washington, D.C. to California. These are just a few of the shots of my brother and I. Here we are. Oops, sorry. I'm jumping ahead there. Let's push the wrong button. That's my brother and I up in Alaska. This is the Badlands. This is Glacier. And then this is the North Cascades. That's my dad right there. This is our exchange student from Sweden that came with us as well. Anyway, every summer, my parents saw it as their job to take us to Glacier National Park in Montana. Has anyone been there? Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, I hated that park. I flat out hated that park. Why? Well, my dad grew up in Montana, and so we had family in Missoula. And like I said, every summer we'd go see them, and then we'd go to Glacier National Park. And as a young kid, spending time in Glacier National Park while all your other friends were doing things that were much more exciting, like going to Disneyland or Hawaii, or even what I want to do, just stay home, I had to be drugged kicking and screaming to Glacier National Park every summer. And my essay every summer when I came back to school, what did you do over the summer? I went to crummy Glacier National Park. Well, a few years later, in 1991, my dad decided that it was time for us to go again. I was much older at that time, almost 21, and he wanted to go to Glacier again. And when we got there, it was as if I'd never seen the park before in my life. I must have been in the park with my eyes closed and my head down, because I literally had an eye-opening new experience of seeing that park. And so the next year, at that point in 1981, said, I'm going to be working in this park the next year. And I did. That's where I got my first ranger job. And I started doing evening programs, and I would tell people, bring kids to parks, because if parks are going to continue, we need to have future people that are going and advocates so that they will be there to help preserve and protect those places. Now, they may go kicking and screaming and may not like it, but say 20 years later, they will thank you for taking you to the national parks or taking them to the national parks. I was able to give one of my campfire programs at Yellowstone and actually thank my parents in front of a crowd of 300 or 400, saying I know how hard it was to take me to these places. Again, I wasn't the best park visitor, but it did sink in, and it does sink in, and I know it's important to bring kids to the national parks, so keep doing that. And national parks have recognized this, have programs specifically set up for kids called the Junior Ranger Program. You'll find information on all their websites about these. and can get more information. And when you're done, you learned a little bit about the parks, the kids and the parents, and you get little badges to show off how much you've learned. The other thing I encourage people to do is get involved. So in a previous life, so I've had a number of lives. I was a lobbyist for a couple of nonprofits and spent years walking the halls of Congress advocating for our national parks. I'm also the deputy mayor of my hometown. Actually, my official title is called the Mayor Pro Tem, which my kids now say is basically means the pretend mayor. So I don't have a lot of respect in my family. But why do I tell you all of this? Well, it's not to toot my own horn. It's basically, sorry, I'm going to back up. It's basically that writing, calling, visiting your lawmakers and Park Service personnel is an excellent way to ensure that your parks are better protected. As an elected official and former lobbyist myself, I can assure you that making your voice heard really does make a difference, especially with the parks. The best way to bring something to someone's attention, a lawmaker's attention, is to send them a letter. We often aren't aware of an issue until a constituent writes us. And I'll let you in on a little secret, especially at the local level, we don't get a lot of letters. We don't get a lot of people calling us. And those letters that do come in have a disproportionate impact on deliberations, because we are saying, we're hearing from constituents that took the time to actually write a letter. Hey, that's something we might want to pay attention to. Now, I know some of you might be uncomfortable, actually, with some of the politics maybe involved with that, but there are other ways to get involved. On every Park Service site, there is a little menu right down here that says Get Involved, and there's a number of things I'm going to talk about here real quickly. But on a page like that, you'll also find the listing of, say, the current management plans that are under review. So plans for, say, protecting grizzly bears or managing invasive species. You will see those listed there where the Park Service is asking for the public's comment. And I can assure you that every comment that comes in is cataloged, it's read, and it will be responded to in, say, a management plan like that. So you can have a huge impact on your parks. But there are other things you can do as well. So on what's called the VIP program in the national parks, this is called the Volunteers in the Parks program. It's a great way to offer your talents and skills in protecting your national parks. So with the VIP program to start, you can work side by side with park personnel on protecting natural, historical, and cultural resources. VIPs in many parks do everything from staffing visitor centers to walking the trails to talking to visitors to giving national park presentations. They're basically volunteer rangers, is what you'll see. And they'll wear a little different uniform. It'll say VIP on them, but you basically have the exact same responsibility as an interpretation ranger would have. Are there any artists out there in the crowd? Yeah, a couple. Okay. Well, the Park Service also has opportunities for artists as well. The VIP program has a unique opportunity for artists to spend time in these parks working and exploring their art. From writing books to painting to dance, all of those, there are potential opportunities for that. These opportunities are across the park system and allow you to explore your creative media. The programs last anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. And then the Park Service at the end asks you to give a presentation to the public on kind of your experience and some of the art that you've created. Like the Artists in Residence program, there also is the Park Service has the opportunity for people that are interested in assisting with the discovery of science or the discovery of new information in the parks as well. Citizen scientists are people just like you who volunteer to collect data and answer real-world questions about their parks. They contribute information that helps the Park Service manage the parks. Sometimes they even work side by side with professional scientists. Finally, is anyone looking for an opportunity to spend an entire summer in the parks for free? Anyone think about that? Anyone like that? Well, then you're in luck, because there is what's called the Campground Host program. In many national parks and the big campgrounds, they need additional help. from people that have volunteered to actually serve as the Park Service's face and answer questions for visitors that are staying there. You get basically allowed to stay there for free. Many parks have hookups with water and electric and sewer. And as I have found, spending an entire season in a park gives you a better appreciation for those resources as the seasons change. So it's a great way to spend your time and give back to the parks. So as you can see, with a little homework, some pre-planning, perhaps going on a hike, taking some kids with you, and getting it involved, one can improve your park trip and leave them in better shape than when you found them. Because in the end, it's up to all of us if our parks will continue into the future. So I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I generally appreciate your time, and I'll be around here for a few more minutes. But again, thank you very much for coming out.